Hi, friends. This is my friend Nadine,
Hi.
and she's also one of my $20 patrons, which means I owe her a birthday video. But this is a belated one because, why was?
Because I'm
Because,
moving tomorrow and I've been
yeah,
crazy busy.
yeah, and so have I. So originally I was just gonna go donate blood, and then I realized people who aren't feeling well shouldn't donate blood. So,
But everybody else who is eligible should.
yeah. So I remembered last year she had suggested we do a video on Diamond Blackfan Anemia, which her daughter, do we use your daughter's name?
Chelsea.
Which her daughter Chelsea was born with. And a year ago today, she had her bone marrow transplant. And it was a huge success. And we are celebrating.
We
But we're
are.
also sad because now she's moving away from me. Um, we took lots of different photos of ourselves. First, my head looked really giant
I
compared
was
to
like
hers.
leaning in this way and I looked like a child.
So first you're like, high angles because of double chins, right? I always laugh when women take photos way up here. I'm like, why are you doing that? And then, okay, let's do a double chin shot. Ready?
It's like I'm taking a photo of the Space Needle and I want to make sure I get the Space Needle, so I'm going to
Yeah.
hold the phone down low.
Imagine the Space Needle is behind us. See that? So, yeah, my head looked way bigger than hers. And then, I don't know, we're at different
I'm like
levels.
leaning weird. Oh yeah, I'm downhill. I'm
Oh,
downhill.
she's downhill, that's why. So, how tall are you?
5'5".
Okay, she's actually taller than me. All right.
Oh, am I?
So then I was like trying to put my head back, and that was creating more of a double chin. See that?
Yeah. Anyway, oh sorry, I got your hair.
Neither of us decided that we should look like models today. Well, Nadine always looks like a model, so she doesn't think she looks hot, but she does. Okay, we're
So
gonna get
easy.
serious now.
Yes.
Tell us about Diamond Blackfan Anemia, because I know I will forget the scientific explanation.
It's okay.
Do you want to pretend microphone? There's a piece of wood right there.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Oh, the dog has been chewing on it. Oh,
We're gonna turn it over to Nadine now.
okay. Hi,
Nadine.
folks. My name's Nadine. I have 3 children. My youngest, Chelsea, has Diamond Blackfan Anemia. This is kind of weird. I'm going to put it down. It's a bone marrow disorder where she basically was born not making red blood cells, and we learned that when she was 5 weeks old, she had a fever, and she's in that range where the doctors say always call with any fever, and I'm like, I'm not a first-time mom. I feel so dumb. Like, oh my gosh, my baby has a fever. But he was like, yeah, let's bring her into the clinic and we'll check her out. And he was hoping that she was going to have like an ear infection or a UTI or some obvious explanation for a fever, and she didn't. So he sent us to the hospital for some testing, and he just emphasizes like, don't freak out. This is just precautionary. Everything's probably fine. So then we take her down to the hospital. They do a chest x-ray and a spinal tap and a CBC, complete blood count test, and blood cultures and a nasal swab. And the nurse is like, I promise it'll calm down soon. All this testing is just, it's wild, and then you can rest after this. And then the doctor comes in with tears on his face, and the CBC had come back, and her hemoglobin was 5.9, which is about half of what it should have been, meaning that she was lacking red blood cells, and her neutrophils, which are the type of white blood cell that fights off bacteria, were at 0. And he said that he'd never even seen 0 before. It's so like he's seen low numbers but never 0. They weren't necessarily worried about cancer because she had platelets, but if the platelets had been involved, they would have suspected cancer. But anyway, they put us on an ambulance, and sent us to the Children's Hospital. The next day, she got her first transfusion, and they told us kind of briefly about some potential diagnoses, things that could be wrong, but they weren't going to assume anything serious because I did have a small placental abruption with her, and so they said there's a chance that you could have just, or that she could have lost some blood during delivery, and that maybe she just needed this refill on blood, and she'll be fine. So they got her fever went away. They never figured out exactly what was causing the fever, but the cultures never grew, meaning she did not have an infection in her bloodstream. So they sent us home to do blood tests every, I think, 3 days. And the first one, her blood count or her hemoglobin had stayed constant. And then the next one, it had dropped, which I knew as soon as I got that result that something else was wrong, because babies don't just not make red blood cells unless something is wrong. So anyway, they had us go back up to primaries. This was the Children's Hospital in Utah. And she got her next transfusion, and they did a bone marrow biopsy which showed an absence of the precursors of red blood cells. Really basic science real fast if you don't know. Our bone marrow it's red, it's like the spongy part on the inside of your bone, and it makes white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. And there's these precursor cells that grow and develop into those different cells, and they differentiate and everything, but the red blood cell precursors there weren't any. And the white blood cells and platelets were fine in her bone marrow. It took us several months to actually get a diagnosis because they have to do genetic testing. And even when they got the genetic testing, she has a mutation on her RPS19 gene, which they didn't have her exact mutation documented as causing DBA. So they classified it as a variant of unknown significance, and then like a year later they had protein function testing done, which confirmed that it is in fact DBA. Anyway, at that point we did transfusions about every 3 weeks, basically whenever she needed it. I don't know how much to go into. After you have several transfusions, it's like 10 or 15, then you start having to do chelation therapy, because my body, I make red blood cells, right? I get a negligible amount of iron in my diet. The amount of iron that you get in a red blood cell transfusion is huge compared to what you take in your diet. And then as our red blood cells get old and die, our body takes the iron that was in the hemoglobin molecule that was in the red blood cell and recycles it when it makes the new red blood cell. So we just have the same iron. Red blood cells get old and die. That iron goes in new red blood cells. But with someone who's not making their own red blood cells, the old iron that's not useful anymore, it's not in the hemoglobin molecule, so that your body can't use it to deliver oxygen to your body. It just accumulates, and then eventually it starts depositing in organs. The two that they check often are liver and heart. As it gets higher and higher, it can actually, the person can die from basically toxic heavy metal poisoning. So that's bad. So iron chelation is to get rid of the extra iron, but they're not making red blood cells, so you still have to keep transfusing. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle, and the chelation has some pretty harsh side effects as well. And if you over chelate, they can lose their eyesight or their hearing.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just kind of a nightmare. They also, sometimes people with DBA will respond to steroids and will start making red blood cells on their own.
I didn't know that.
I've heard as high as 80%, but it seems like
Really?
of the people that I know that number is lower than 80%. But didn't work for Chelsea. We tried a steroid trial once, it didn't work. They suggested we take her to transplant, but I was terrified of that. So I said, well, let's try another steroid trial, and they tried it again.
You mean the bone marrow transplant? Or?
Yeah, bone marrow transplant. It was just scary because, like,
as you learned, it is scary.
Yeah, well, because I knew, like, transfusions is what we knew. When we knew that we could do it, and we knew that there's side effects in the chelation, and it's a pain to live that way, and it's hard on her body, right, to go through this cycle of having normal hemoglobin for a couple days, and then they don't like keep you at a normal level, because if they do, your iron overload is going to be unmanageable. So they let you get down to like a 8 or 9 or sometimes even 7 hemoglobin, which is really low. Like the
Yeah.
levels that Chelsea would get to in between transfusions, if you or I had that low of hemoglobin, we would probably not even want to sit up in bed. And she would like run and dance and play
She
just
has
because she was so.
crazy amounts of energy.
Well, not just her, everybody with DBA, I swear.
Like,
Like,
she bounces back like no one I know. It's amazing. She can be deathly ill one moment. Like, was it Thanksgiving when she
uh-huh.
had the super? How high was her fever?
It got up to
107.
like 42. I think that's around 107.
It was really high and scared the crud out of everyone.
Yeah, she had an
Um,
infection in her Hickman line.
oh, so when we started hanging out together, we go for walks, and she was telling me how it was hard to know when she needed a blood transfusion sometimes because it wasn't like it was this clockwork sort of thing, like, okay, we do it every 3 weeks. Sometimes she needed it sooner than other times. And so when Chelsea got a bit older, Nadine shared how Chelsea started to know. How old was she when she started to say, I need
I
blood?
think she was 2.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, like I was like brought tears to my eyes, like she's so little and she knows she needs a blood transfusion and
Yeah, she asked
oh
to
my
go have labs.
gosh.
She says, oh, "Let's go get labs," and I was like, "It's not lab day." I was wondering, does she just
Uh-huh.
think that today's the day we're supposed to get
Or does
labs?
she like the lab people?
Well, she does, but I mean, also not. But then later, she said, "I need blood." I'm like, okay. I mean, you're 2, but I'll listen. And I called, and her hemoglobin was low.
Wow.
So she listened to her body, and she knew
That's
that
so
she needed
amazing.
blood. And she knew that she felt better when she had enough hemoglobin.
She always showed before and after photos. We'll have to share one of the before and afters so you guys
Definitely.
can see how she looks before a blood transfusion and after. I've been wanting to give blood for a long time. I donated plasma many years ago and I threw up a bunch afterwards. And so I wasn't sure if it would have the same effect on me if I just donated blood. So I've been a little bit nervous about it, and my dad actually yelled at me when I donated plasma.
Oh, really?
But I just keep thinking about her and others who have survived just because of blood donations, you know?
One of
So,
the other
so
moms
important.
that has a child with DVA uses a hashtag. He doesn't like needles either. Like you'll hear people say, "Oh, I hate needles. I can't donate blood."
Oh, yeah.
And she'll be like, "Yeah, guess what? He doesn't like needles either, but he'll die if he doesn't." So,
Oh my
sorry, not a
gosh.
valid excuse.
Yes. I'm not afraid of needles, even.
That was harsh, not a valid excuse. Fear and pain are legitimate. However, it's hard when it's like
It's,
she doesn't
you
want to
can
be.
do hard things.
Yes, that there we
Yeah.
go. You can do hard things.
I've given birth. I can donate blood. Come on.
Very different. Very different
And
experiences.
if it doesn't go well, if I die, I won't do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's kind of how that works.
There was a year where Chelsea almost had her bone marrow transplant,
Well,
but
can I talk about the consultation first?
yes.
So the hematologist at the Children's Hospital sends us to a bone marrow transplant specialist, basically. And we sat down and had I think we were with her for like 2.5 hours, where she talks about transplants and risks and different options and benefits and the process, the conditioning. That's what they call the chemo that they do, because basically you get chemo to wipe out the bone marrow that's there, to create a blank slate, a blank canvas for this new bone marrow to come in, take up shop, and hopefully function properly. And we talked about everything under the sun, and I left feeling like it was probably the best option for Chelsea. We had a sibling match. Our oldest child is a bone marrow match, and that gives her greater chances of the bone marrow transplant being successful and not having some of the same complications, or at least not to the same severity. But the chemo can make it so that they can never have children, and like there's a bunch of other, like it can ruin their thyroid and they'll have to take thyroid medicine for the rest of their life, and it's like there's really, I don't know, my kind of takeaway was that there's no cure. Like there's just which option is going to be the least crappy for my child.
Right.
So that was kind of sad. And we did a ton of research on the fertility stuff, called different fertility specialists, because one option is you can do, what do they call it? Harvest an ovary, basically, and freeze it. But it's experimental. So
The ovary itself?
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And there's no data on how well it works. And there's no data on how safe it is. And insurance doesn't pay for it. And we ended up choosing not to go that route. Especially because, I mean, she was transfusion dependent pre-transplant, and it's a risky surgery for someone who is transfusion dependent, and we'd have to go to California to do it, because not every, like on a 3-year-old, like there's only like 2 clinics in the nation that will do it. It's super experimental.
Oh, wow.
But we learned that there are potentially other options. The type of chemo, okay, so the reason why we chose to do the transplant here in Seattle is because there's a type of chemo called triosulfan that is less toxic on the liver. And for people like Chelsea who already have, their livers are, you know, they have the iron overload, and so they're not as healthy as just a normal liver. I don't know how you'd even say that. That it's better, in my opinion. For Chelsea, we chose to go that route because there's less chance of what's called VOD, which is a problem that the chemo can cause that makes the liver shut down, that can be fatal. And she didn't die in transplant. Knock on wood.
That was my favorite part.
I know, right? Mine too.
She's a tough cookie.
She really is, and she thrived through it. Anyway, so
Yeah,
that was the
so
consultation.
you guys almost had the transplant, and then they did the MRI, and
her liver iron was too high.
Yeah, the iron was too high.
It had to be below 10.
Yeah, and I was like, I didn't know that was gonna be a thing.
Yeah, one thing with the triosulfan is it only had to go down to 10. With like busulfan or some of the other conditioning regimens out there, you'd have to get it down to like 5 or 3, which would mean years more of the chelation before she'd even be eligible to do transplant. So that's another big reason.
Okay, so the chelation thing involves a nightly routine where she had to numb her skin with a gel, right?
Yeah, just a lidocaine cream.
Yeah, so there were a few times I was here and witnessed the bedtime routine, and I was like, oh man. And sometimes
a vial with sterile water and the vial with the medicine, and I have to
sometimes I feel like just getting them to brush their teeth and go to bed, you know, like I can't complain now after.
It's bedtime is still hard, but there would be times where I'm like, I just want to be reading stories to my kids, not gloving up and mixing and measuring. Like I'd have to reconstitute the medicine and then. And
I'd never heard of this disease. What do you call it? A disease or a disorder? I'd never heard of this ever. And then she started explaining to me how difficult transplant is, but I didn't really quite understand it until we watched some friends, their son went through it, but he actually has something called Fanconi anemia, which is sort of similar, right?
There are some similarities. There are some major differences,
but it still results in a bone marrow transplant, and
it's another non-malignant bone marrow disorder.
Yeah, and so we watched this poor little boy go through the most awful things. He had sores all down his throat and everything. It hurt to eat. His sores,
mucositis is what that's called.
And when you have that, it's like all down your intestinal tract and everything. And I just can't imagine how Nadine must have been feeling watching that, knowing that Chelsea was just about to do that. And then Chelsea started to go through hers, and then my dad was gearing up for his stem cell transplant.
Which is the same thing. That's just another name for bone marrow transplant.
Okay. So I'm going, okay, I feel a little bit better now that Chelsea's not doing as awful.
Oh,
Right?
that's so sad.
Like,
So that little
'cause
boy
I
had
was,
a different conditioning regimen,
yeah,
meaning he had different
okay,
chemo, and that can have a huge impact on everything. How long it takes for them to engraft with their new blood cells, how
okay.
many complications they have.
But
So
my dad used
it
his
was
own
expected to have
cells, and
her
so he didn't have
have
to deal
less
with the
GVHD.
suppressing the immune system to prevent him from rejecting the cells. So there are all these unpleasant symptoms that can happen. Um, so what it's called graft versus
Versus
host
host disease,
disease.
GVHD. So you say
Yes.
him rejecting the cells with a solid organ transplant, like a lung transplant or a kidney. Your body can reject the organ.
Mm-hmm.
With a bone marrow transplant, it's kind of the other way around because the
Oh,
immune
okay.
system is what was transplanted. So with someone like
Oh.
Chelsea, she has Brady's immune system in her body post-transplant, and those white blood
Oh,
cells are like,
interesting.
oh, this is in my body, and that's what can cause the graft versus host, because the graft is Brady's bone marrow, the host is
Oh.
Chelsea. So it
Okay.
would be the person who donated their bone marrow
Gotcha.
attacking the
Oh
person.
my
So
gosh.
they have to suppress specifically the T cells
Mm-hmm.
and let it come back in very slowly on, yeah, so they're immunocompromised the whole time. And so while they're recovering from
Mm-hmm.
this transplant, they're super susceptible to like every disease, and they can't start getting immunizations again. They can't start
Mm-hmm.
getting immunizations again, and then there's a measles outbreak in the area, which just
Yeah.
breaks my heart
Measles
beyond belief, because if
outbreak.
her immune system isn't even strong enough for the immunization, she would like die if she got the actual disease. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
people like in our area that just think that it's their own business whether or not they immunize or not, but it's not. It's a public health issue. And if you're on the fence, I'm going to beg you right now, please, please, please immunize yourself and your children and do everything you can to eradicate diseases like measles that were basically eradicated. I learned of a child, I didn't know this child personally, but had cancer, got treatment, beat cancer. They were in the same situation as Chelsea, where they were recovering from having had the chemo and everything, and then they contracted measles and died. And I just think, can you imagine having beaten cancer and then died of the measles
Mm.
because of somebody who thought that it wasn't important to vaccinate their child? That's not to say that there aren't people who have legitimate allergic reactions, but the
Yeah.
number is negligible compared to the number of people who just don't think it's that big of a deal, or that what's that one, there's some politician's wife that was tweeting like, bring back childhood diseases, we can be healthier. False. That's not
No.
science.
Okay, so
Even if you're not on the fence, I'm still going to beg you to please immunize yourself and your children.
yes. So last year, before Nadine's birthday, I made a special video for Chelsea because they weren't allowed to go to any, well, public places that had lots of people. And that was
Or
really,
animals, or
yeah, like,
there
so
was so
they
many.
live on a little farm here, and she couldn't play.
Chickens back there.
Yes, it's so pretty here, you guys. Yeah, Chelsea couldn't play with pets anymore.
Our pets were
Um,
okay, but like not the
yeah.
chickens, and not
Yeah.
yeah.
And
she couldn't go
then
barefoot outside for a whole year. She
couldn't
couldn't go in the hot
swim.
tub, yeah, or in
Yeah.
the pool.
So many things that she had to give up. And when you're only 3, she was 3, right?
Yeah, she's 4 now, but she was 3
Yeah.
when transplant started.
When you're only 3, it's really hard to understand why you have all these restrictions. So I made a special video where I went to Northwest Trek, which is a really cool zoo where they have a tram, like a bus sort of thing, where you go on a tour and you see bison and lots of cool other animals.
Elk and
Yeah.
bighorn sheep.
And it was so awesome because the driver, I asked him if he'd say a little hello to Chelsea, and he did. And it made me so happy.
All right, and with that, we are going to get on our way here. Again, my name is Tanner, and before we get going, I'd just like to say a special hello to our friend Chelsea, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but we're thinking about her.
So a couple months ago, we went to Northwest Trek. We like brought masks for her, and we brought Clorox wipes, and we called ahead, and they reserved a whole tram car for her, and I wiped down
Nice.
every seat before we let her on, and I was
Nice.
terrified because it was just barely when she was starting to be able to go
Yeah.
to non-crowded things. And when I was explaining this to the people at the tram, they were like, "Did you have a friend that came by last summer? Did I tell you this yet?"
No, you didn't tell me
okay,
this.
I'm sorry. They're like, "Did you have a friend that came by last summer and made a video for her?" And
Oh,
they
they
totally
remembered.
remembered Sarah
Oh.
being there, and they were so thrilled to see how well Chelsea was doing.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad they
love
got
that
to
place.
hear how it turned out and that
Yeah.
she's doing well.
We love
And
Northwest
they
York.
probably thought she was adorable too.
Oh yeah, because she is. It's it's
she
a
is. We'll introduce her in a little bit.
objective.
Right now, Sabrina and Chelsea are playing together, having a
Yeah.
great time. So, how many days were you guys in the hospital? I forget the details here.
Oh
This
gosh.
is really, really hard.
I think
this
we were
is
in
a
the hospital
isolating.
for about a month. So we
So in
got
the hospital for a
there
month.
July 26th, and I think
Mhm.
August 27th
Mhm.
maybe was the day that she got discharged.
And then Chelsea couldn't come home for a long time, and Nadine couldn't be with her other two children.
They could come visit if they
They
were
come-
completely healthy.
Yes.
But she couldn't leave like a 30-minute drive of the children's hospital because if she
Mhm.
were to get a fever, it could be septic shock, and she would have not
Mhm.
much time to get into treatment before she
Right.
would pass away. So we had to live very close to the hospital.
Yeah.
I think November 9th or 10th or something like that was when we were finally allowed to come home. So that was a
Mhm.
long time.
And it
was
wasn't
hard.
all that long later where she got that crazy high fever.
Yeah, it was
right?
the end of November.
And I was feeling really sad because I was sick for Thanksgiving and couldn't go to my parents. And once I saw how a cold was affecting Chelsea, I was like, I'm okay with missing Thanksgiving with my parents. I don't want my dad to go through something like this.
It's hard.
Really hard. And I got to visit Nadine in Seattle once, and I explained to Sabrina ahead of time, Chelsea doesn't have hair now. And I just didn't want her to say something that would maybe make her feel bad, like, why are you bald? Or and recently, she hadn't seen her for a while, and she started talking about Chelsea's haircut doctor. The haircut doctor, because I did explain to her that Chelsea was sick and the medicine was making her lose her hair. Oh, it broke my heart. Like during the hair loss period where she had a lint roller just to collect her hair until she decided she was ready to part with her hair. I can't even imagine.
I was amazed by how much hair.
Yeah.
Like she would lose so much hair, and I'd have this like huge handful. I'd be like, "Man, that's got to be like a quarter of her hair." And then the next day,
Looked like a small animal.
it
Right.
was definitely a small animal. Yeah, but
But
it
she
all
handled
fell
it
out.
really well, I thought,
She had sad
considering.
moments.
Yeah.
Her hair came back different though. It used to be brown and fine and straight,
Yeah.
and it came back in kind of a dark blonde and coarse and curly.
It's a thing called chemo fro,
Yeah,
is what
I love it.
I think my brother called it that. I don't know. But
It's
yeah,
cute.
my dad's hair came in kind of curly-ish too.
Chelsea
and
likes her curly
and he
hair now.
keeps getting haircuts, and we wonder if it'll finally grow back normal, but no, not yet.
I don't know that it ever goes back.
How many days were you guys away from home total? Wasn't it over 100 days?
It was.
That is a really long time.
Yeah.
But I did get to see Nadine at choir sometimes. She had people who would go and be with Chelsea, and she really needed that. She really needed to get out of that apartment. I mean, it was good as far as apartments go, but imagine being in an apartment all day, well, except for all the medical stuff that you're going to, with a stir-crazy 3-year-old who's not allowed to do much.
We watched a lot of episodes of Fancy Nancy.
I haven't seen Fancy Nancy.
And people were so amazing. People would send like coloring books and sticker puzzles, Anna and Elsa sticker puzzles, and watercolor paints, and what else? like building toys and so many different fun things for her to do. Oh, Hatchimals. We discovered that she loves Hatchimals. I would incentivize her to, like, she'd have high fluid goals. She had to drink
Oh
40
yes, the
ounces of
fluid
fluid.
goals.
So
Oh
the
my gosh.
tacrolimus is the immunosuppressant that she was on, and it can be really hard on kidneys. So she'd have to drink a lot of water every day. And so I would be like, if you hit
And
your fluid goal,
Didn't
you
she
know.
have to drink a certain amount before she could leave the hospital or something too?
Yeah.
I seem to recall something
Well, and
like that.
we would do nighttime fluids even after she left the hospital. She
Mhm.
she still had her Hickman line, and I would just hook up
Right.
fluids to her at night. But to get off the fluids, she had to get to a point where she could tolerate a certain level of magnesium orally, because the tacrolimus also causes magnesium wasting. And then she had to drink a lot of fluids because her kidneys had to be able to
Yeah.
process a lot of fluids so that it didn't get damaged by the tacro.
It's so complicated,
It
you
really
guys.
is.
I can't wait to introduce you to Chelsea. She's just
amazing.
a miracle. So we planned to get together. We didn't even realize today was the anniversary of the transplant.
Here.
One of the hardest things was losing one of her little friends in the hospital who was going through the same procedure. And
We've actually lost two now.
two?
One
Oh no.
young and one teenager.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
And then I complain about things like, oh, the fluid goal, it's so hard to make. And it is hard.
Wasn't top ramen the answer to the fluid
Top
goal?
ramen solved so many
She
of
had
our
a
problems.
very difficult time getting her to take all her fluids. And
Nobody cared about how much sugar or how much salt. It
Yeah.
was just like, get the fluid in her.
just drink it.
Yep. I mean, now it matters a little bit more, but like nutrition wise, it was like the most important thing is fluids. High fructose corn syrup? We're good. Good. And one other thing I was going to say is that her skin is very sensitive, and that's from she has had some GVHD in her skin, and some of the medicines that she's been on make her skin sensitive to the sun, and chemo itself can cause secondary cancers. Most commonly, at least for her conditioning, is skin cancer. So we have to use sunscreen religiously, and it has to be like baby sunscreen, like the kind that just has the zinc oxide, and even fragrance free will still cause her to break out if it's not like super ultra natural. So we have to get the expensive stuff, and
Oh
she
my
will not
gosh.
hold still. We have to put lotion on her all the time too, because she still is at risk of developing rashes again for
Oh
the
my
GVHD.
gosh.
So it's not over yet.
Yeah.
But
And this last week, she did a bunch of appointments and had to have another bone marrow biopsy, and that is not fun.
she does great though.
She's a
Even
trooper.
the fasting, because she has to go under anesthesia for the biopsy and also for the MRIs where they check the liver iron, which is really cool. It's an MRI that they measure in increments of time. It's like how many microseconds or whatever
Interesting.
it takes for the magnetic pulses to decay. That's how they can determine the iron content in her liver. It's called a T2 star MRI, and it has to be very specialized. Like, not every hospital can do it.
She's just so amazing, and I just feel so grateful that we get to see what she's going to become, with her fiery little personality. She's going to do amazing things, and I could see her going into the medical field.
Oh, she talks about it all the time.
Yeah. Because
And gymnast.
nothing gives you compassion like going through awful things, right? And I was helping Nadine do some packing, and she had a collection of pen lights because Chelsea would tell all the nurses.
She puts on those puppy dog eyes and is like, "Can I keep this?" And how do you say no to that face?
Yeah, they couldn't say no to her. Oh, here's another pen light. I can get another pen light.
She likes pen lights. Doing checkups on her dolls and stuff.
Well, happy belated birthday.
Thank you. I'm 35.
30. Isn't she gorgeous? You are.
Thank you.
Don't deny it.
Thank you.
Let's flash back to the time we were singing at the Mariners. Flashback.
Okay.
Flashback.
Gotta contribute to the fancy tailgate.
Yes.
This one's super good.
This is so awesome. Have you ever tried that in the s'mores?
No.
We did it last year.
And?
Yeah.
Have to try it.
Melted chocolate and marshmallows. Good,
Chili
no matter
powder.
what. Yeah.
You want to try it? Sure.
That was when we were doing our fancy tailgate.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
We didn't want to pay for parking twice. Like you go to Seattle and you pay $20 to park.
No re-entry privileges, though.
Yeah, so we had to go do sound check to sing the national anthem at the Mariners, and then they said we had to leave. So we would have preferred to drive somewhere and eat a nice meal, but then that's $40-something in parking.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a bunch of salami and cheese and fruit and stuff, and we had ourselves a fancy little tailgate. Okay, we're going to show you Chelsea now.
Okay.
We should go eat cake. Yeah. What happened to the flowers?
They got smashed.
Was it because you guys were hugging?
Yeah.
This is Chelsea. Chelsea, are you a superstar?
I'm a pop star.
You're a pop star? Thanks so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications.
And please donate blood, vaccinate your children, and
Yeah.
donate to the DBA Foundation.
Yes, I will share a link or something.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't move. I mean, don't move away.
Oh, okay. My house is someplace else.
She wants to live with her husband again. Whatever.
We're gonna move back in together. He's been coming to visit for the weekends for an awfully long time. I
Yeah.
think we're ready to take the next.
You feel like you've been having conjugal visits?
Pretty much. We're ready for the next level in our relationship, and we're gonna move in together. We've been married for 12 years.
Glad you guys are ready for that
Yes.
now that you've reproduced 3 times. Yeah.